Hi, this is Caroline from Marcus Evans Online Events. Thank you all for attending today's webinar on CFO Insights and how to gain, control and significantly save on your indirect spending. Brought to you in partnership with Symphony. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. As you can see at the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. All the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. We will try to answer as many as possible during the webinar. But if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, we'll make sure to follow up with you in a separate email after the webinar. A copy of today's slide deck and additional help materials are available in the resource list. So we encourage you to download any resources or bookmark any links you may find useful. For the best viewing experience, we recommend using a wired internet connection and closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background. You can find additional answers to some common technical questions located in the help widget at the bottom of your screen. A reminder to look out for an email within 2 hours after the webinar is done with links to download the webinar slides and recording. At this point, we've got our distinguished moderator, Stefan Dent, Chief Alliance Officer and co-founder of Symphony. So without further ado, I'll kindly hand the floor over to you, Stefan.
Thank you, Caroline. I appreciate that. Let me just push this to the first slide. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to this webinar. As Caroline said, my name is Stefan Dent. I'm the Chief Alliance Officer and co-founder for a company called Symphony. We're a spend management specialist organization. I'll give you a bit of context about what we do later on in the meeting itself. In terms of the context and the agenda here, I'm going to run through an introduction to this. I'll also introduce our panel members. I'm very pleased and delighted that we have a mix of procurement and finance on the panel today. And we've got a number of questions to run through them and get their insights. So in terms of the topic for this today, this is around insights, particularly from the finance community, around how to control and optimize indirect spend. So our focus on this is more on indirect spend. So that's the spend that goes on around the organization versus direct spend, which is typically goods and materials that go into direct delivery of the service. So in terms of the agenda points on here, and also the problem statement, which we go into. So this was shared earlier on. And what we're looking at here is that the struggle really with most sort of mid to large size organizations to actually deliver the right capabilities and spend management technology and really manage this spend, this indirect spend. Sometimes it's also called tail spend as well. And even larger organizations, as it says here, struggle to manage and optimize all of that indirect spend. So as a result of this, procurement delivery is often suboptimal. We're missing out on savings and probably some performance issues along the way. So what we're looking at here is around if we can tackle this and get to grips with this spend, it drives significant bottom line value to the organization. And that's organizations across any sector, okay, irrespective of sector. But the challenge is, how do we actually obtain the capability, the solutions to do this because of the costs involved? So we're looking at here, what are the alternatives and is there a better way of doing things? And then we're looking to take learning and tips and hints from the panel here as to how we can actually apply that to our own organization. So if I move on here, so what is a problem that we're looking to address here? So when we look at spend, we often use this diagram here, this Pareto style diagram, to give us a sort of pictorial representation of spend across our enterprise here. So for large global enterprises, I talked about tail spend earlier, and you can see tail spend here is more on the right-hand side of the diagram. So you have your big strategic spend to the left, then you have your tail spend or non-core spend to the right. So for large organizations, tail spend, that's to the right, is about 10 to 20% of the spend by value, but it often comprises over 90%, even 95% of all of the vendors and transactions. But for medium enterprise or medium to large enterprise, tail spend is often all of this indirect spend. And I'll show you examples of what that spend is in just 2 seconds. And it may also include some of the dark blue spend on the left-hand side. Okay, so all organizations have their own sort of crown jewel spend, whether it's buying metals, chemicals, drugs, that type of thing. So we're talking about, and that is often well managed, but on the right-hand side, that spend is often, a little bit Wild West, is maybe left to the end users to manage. So if we look at examples of what that spend is, and this is purely illustrative, okay? So on the left-hand side, as I mentioned, particularly to your organization, in your sector, it may be electronic components, metals, as I say, pharmaceutical products, whatever it may be. That is typically reasonably well managed, probably within an ERP or MRP system. Our particular focus is on everything else. So to the right-hand side of this, you have what we call tactical spend. Okay, so that's important, urgent stuff that you need today, not necessarily strategic, but it's important today. And then you have what we call repeatable marketplace spend, which is reoccurring spend. Okay, it could be on courier services, packaging, travel management when travel opens back up again. And then obviously to the right-hand side, we have what we call the tip of the tail, which is more around expense management spend. So what we're talking about here today is primarily around this tail or non-core spend. And all organizations have it. That's the point of this. In terms of, just wait for the slide to move across, in terms of the opportunity in here, and I love this slide here because what this shows in terms of the sort of key operational areas within an organization across finance, across marketing, human resources, procurement's probably got the biggest opportunity to automate the end-to-end process. So as it says here, and this is a McKinsey report, you can see the reference at the bottom. It's a great report to look at, actually, that over 80% of procurement can, in fact, be automated across sourcing, procure to invoice to pay, and also analytics, which is analytics and reporting under the support piece here. Where a lot of organizations in mid-market tend to focus, and there's nothing wrong with this at all, by the way, but they tend to focus on the automation of the invoice to payments, which is fantastic. But the comment we're making here, as we can clearly see, is that that's one area of what is a wider scheme here, looking more to the left-hand side, what we call upstream, which is around how we intercept the spend at source and how we triage it and how we manage it to get out cost savings and select the right vendors. And then, of course, we do the matching, the invoicing, and the payment. So what we're looking at here is the whole breadth of this, not just the payments, which we actually do within our own solution, but the left-hand side of this diagram, where there's much more opportunity. The challenge today for a lot of organizations, unless you're a super big organization, a Fortune 100 or maybe 200 company, is there's some great solutions out there. It just costs a huge amount of money. Okay, so the costs are often prohibitive to buy these sort of electronic or e-procurement solutions. But to run these solutions, you also need a bunch of drivers, as we call it. You need a very strong in-house capability to actually drive these solutions, plus the fact you need to buy the capability to implement them as well. So quite simply, a lot of this is just cost prohibitive to most organizations outside of the top sort of 100 or 200 Fortune top big companies because of this. And then the other thing we see here, even those companies that bring in these solutions struggle to actually hit the ROI. So the ROI, obviously built on the business case, can be quite hazy, and it can take you 1-2 years plus to actually break even on these solutions, which is not really good enough for most sort of medium-sized organizations. Okay, they want fast delivery if they're buying a solution. So it's kind of what to do, as it says on there. So I'm kind of stuck in a rut here. But when we look at this in terms of the opportunity for procurement and what procurement can actually deliver, so a 10% procurement saving, which is, in our view, very conservative for most organizations, has the same material impact as increasing prices by about 5% or 25% top-line sales increase. So the question on here is around which one's the easier one to go for. And obviously what I'm encouraging us to look at is the actual procurement savings. That's the in-house untapped opportunity. So Symphony was born, and I've been in procurement pretty much all of my life, to actually tackle this problem, particularly for this type of organization that maybe not the Coca-Colas of the world, or the Fords of the world, that can maybe take on these solutions. So what we sought to do at Symphony, I love that phrase, And what we're trying to do is open up procurement solutions, the technology and the capability to organizations of any size, okay, around the world. So we're a global organization. We're across North America, Europe, Middle East, and Asia Pac down to Australia. Okay, so we do this universally with a very interesting, quite eclectic number of clients actually. And what we learned to actually make this fly, particularly within these sort of organizations, is that just handing over the keys to technology doesn't work. Okay, that's one part of the solution. So what we do, we encompass that within what we call automation workflows on our on-demand platform. But importantly, we've got embedded content. What I mean by content in here is that we've got pre-negotiated deals across a whole range of indirect services. Some of you may be familiar with the GPO concept, particularly in North America. So it's kind of like your own sort of GPO embedded within here. But then actually we're kind of open source, if I can use that phrase here. So if you've got existing deals here, okay, whether it's on buying materials or buying office supplies, it doesn't matter. We're open to taking your own analog content and we'll put it in a platform for you. So this is a B2C type e-commerce front end. And then the last piece on the right-hand side, we have sourcing specialists in what we call buy desk setup that can either augment your existing procurement capability, or it could do something much wider. So it can expand and contract based on your requirements. And again, that buy desk capability is global, okay? So we bundle those together within a non-demand solution. And what's unique with what we've done is that we tackle all of these core areas of spend, and we get significant savings very, very early on, savings from our Symphony marketplace and from actually competing the spend, often for the first time. Okay, so we're actually often competing that spend for the very first time. And then lastly on here, the game changer, and this is something we've been doing for some time, is that we've killed off the traditional license fees, all of those traditional costs that you associate with buying a big piece of technology. We've killed that license fee. We've killed the annual maintenance fees. What we do is we focus on the content and the spend flowing through the platform. It's not just about the platform. It's obviously important, but it's about what you do with that spend and how we deliver a fast ROI. So on the right-hand side, what it shows here is that our fees are linked to the actual spend and the ROI through the platform, which is why we can get going very quickly. And we're often operational within about 4 to 5 weeks. That's incredibly fast. So we're really changing the rules of the game in terms of what we're doing. So you get the savings. A big thing in procurement right now is ESG. That's environmental, social, and governance. And I'm sure that's occurring within your own local organizations. We get significant process savings. We have what we call our Simply One Vendor solution, where we can manage the payments to your vendors, particularly the transactional payments to your high volume but less strategic vendors. Great user experience, and also there's potentially resource savings within the enterprise as well. So let me just roll into the actual panel here and introduce our panel for today. Okay, so let me just bring up the screen on here. So that's me top left, but I'm very pleased to introduce you to John. So John Kervink is the VP, Vice President for Performance and Financial Strategy, and he's a CFO, so that's quite a struggle to get all of those out. At Grey Bruce Health Services, based in Ontario. And Grey Bruce is a health system with 6 acute care hospitals with an operating budget of well over $200 million and over 2,000 people across the campuses. John's role encompasses, as it says in the title, a whole bunch of things, but it also includes obviously finance, but into supply chain and procurement. And John's going to talk later about some of his experiences at Grey Bruce in terms of enhancing procurement delivery. I'd like to welcome Paul. Paul Runco heads the Global Finance Center of Excellence at BlueCrest. Paul's been working in executive finance roles for over 25 years. Most of these are private equity-backed entities, which is a key focus for us, actually. So a lot of mid-market entities where they're looking to actually get cost savings and performance improvement from procurement. So Paul's actually worked more in the procurement guise as well as finance, so we can see it from both perspectives. And then finally, I'd like to introduce you to Frank. Frank Areda Pereira is the head of procurement at DocuSign. I think everyone knows who DocuSign are. So Frank's a procurement guy, much the same as myself, actually, and he's been running procurements here at DocuSign and transforming their delivery over the last several months. Prior to DocuSign, he was at Dolby Laboratories, where he was overseeing and growing the sourcing and purchasing function there. So we've got some great talent on the panel today. What we're going to do, without further ado, is go through a number of open questions on here that I'll just introduce, and then I'm going to ask the panel to talk to, and we discuss these. So we've got 4 of these to go through. There are some polling questions as well that if we get time, we're going to go through those as well. Plus there's the opportunity for the audience here to also ask their questions. Okay, so if you want to put your questions now, we'll gather those and we'll come to those questions towards the end of the session. Okay, so I hope that's clear. I'm going to go into the first question here. And this is a really interesting one for me. And this is about the perception of procurement, okay, particularly from people outside of procurement, in the finance community or the wider business. So procurement, and I know this, probably Frank knows this, we often get a bad rap as having, average capabilities, we're slow, we only focus on, costs, we're one-dimensional, and maybe the processes aren't that great. So the question on here to our panel is, I'd like to sort of reflect on this, and, is procurement, in your experience, finance's best buddy? Is it a real problem area, or is it something that just needs to, needs some love and attention, and it's a wonderful goldmine opportunity? So I'd like to open that out to our panel, and maybe Paul, if you can hear us here, would you like to maybe kick us off in terms of your view on this question?
Yes, thanks, Stefan, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the call. One thing that Stefan did not mention is because of the kind of companies I've worked for over my career, I've been part of over 150 acquired companies. And, what that should mean is that, I've looked at a lot of different procurement processes, both from the supply chain and procurement side as well as the finance side. And so this is kind of a loaded question when I look at all 150 acquisitions and the role I've played in, are we the best friends or not the best friends? What I've just found on average in most organizations is that that procurement is typically a low priority. And when I look at things like cost savings, because when I join most companies, I'm really in there to drive cost savings or manage working capital and things of that nature. When I walk in the door there, it's typically the cost savings is driven by finance versus procurement. It's pretty rare from my experience that when I walk in the door, the procurement team, and that's where I think you have this perception thing, they're doing a great job managing vendors. They're doing a great job taking orders and making sure those process on time. But when I walk in the door and I'm just looking how to save money as my top priority, there's a different dimension on who's driving that, how do we drive that, how important it is, how does that fit within the budget of the organization, how does that contribute to margin contribution and bottom line operations and performance. And so there's a little difference there. So I like to look at this question as, great finance people take this from a low priority to a top priority, that their business partners are something that they understand is important to manage, and that at the end of the day, whether they're friends today or not, that, going forward, that, they become glued at the hip because most of the outside of the direct spend, which is usually the big numbers, this is the second biggest opportunity to save some money and really plan for the future.
If I can just ask you, thanks for that response, Paul. From the private equity angle, and you've done this so many times, is procurement one of the sort of first areas that you go to? So when you presumably acquire a new business, is this in your top sort of 2 or 3 areas to go to get some quick wins?
Yeah, both on the direct and indirect side. Where direct, I've found, Stefan, there's a lot more controls in place. There's typically a better handle on the budget and the future direction for the year. But indirect is, again, a lower priority. Typically, they don't have the same kind of tools, whether it's software, whether it's processes, whether people dedicated to making the process better. And when I walk in the door, over my 30 years career, I've saved anywhere, depending on category, anywhere from 5 to 25% savings in those categories, which, you know, when you add that to the bottom line, it's tremendous savings that you look at. But it's something you got to focus on. You got to drive. You got to evaluate the people that manage it. You got to look at the processes and what tools do you have to do it. A lot of times that the reason people don't achieve greatness is they don't have the right tools, including the right software to manage it.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for that. Maybe if I can pivot to maybe John, anything to add to what Paul said around, you know, the perception of procurement, you know, friend or foe? Can we hear John?
Thanks, Stefan. Now that I've taken myself off mute, that's a little bit helpful. I echo what Paul says, and I think, you know, it's interesting because I say coming into a new organization, first read on procurement was, you know, difficult to work with, rigid, and it's changing that perception and making them a strategic partner, which is really, you know, what they can become. So I'd say, you know, they are an untapped resource that really needs to be recognized for all the value that they add to the organization. And really everything starts with procurement, and you know, they're much more than just order takers. So it's just changing those perceptions, and that has to happen both external to procurement, changing the perceptions of the people that use procurement, as well as changing the perceptions of the folks and the talent that you have in your procurement function, you know, so that they realize just how important they are and how key their function is, you know, to the successful operation of any enterprise. And we certainly found that, you know, being in healthcare during COVID, procurement was key, being able to source, you know, and that really, you know, that really put them up on you know, gave them a lot more visibility than they've ever had in the past. And so we just need to leverage that and continue to grow that.
That's an interesting one, and obviously we're aware of that, particularly in your, you know, healthcare area. So that probably, well, I think you're saying, brought procurement to the front of the house, you know, in this emergency situation. It probably exposed a few things, I'm guessing, as well. But did it help overall to sort of raise the profile of procurement about what it can do? Did it, you know, was it overall helpful for procurement? I'm sure they worked incredibly hard over the last several months. But did it help to actually raise their profile and, you know, reposition them within the company?
Yes, certainly. Brought them to a lot of tables that they weren't present at before. And I think with everything, the challenges with supply chain, I mean, they really pulled through when there were certain, say, protective PPE, we call it, you know, protective medical equipment like masks and things like that, where you couldn't get them, but you needed them to keep everyone safe, patients and staff. They were able to source alternate channels and negotiate really good deals, which, you know, economically is important. It's much more than saving money. It's also value add to the process.
Yeah, for sure. I can imagine. I can absolutely imagine. And then to sort of close this area off, it'd be great to get Frank's input. So Frank's kind of my side of the fence. So Frank's a procurement guy. I'm a procurement guy. And so we heard from finance here, which was, I think was a great input here, particularly about the healthcare piece. So you're seeing this probably, Frank, from the other side, and I'm sure you've got views on this. So when you've gone into organizations, obviously you're at DocuSign now, you're at Dolby before, and maybe thinking about when you entered into the role in the first, you know, 2-3 months, and you were working out the organization, what's important, what you've inherited, I guess. Have you picked up, you know, the sort of ambience, as it were, and about what the view, particularly from finances or procurement? Really keen to get your own perspective from the other side of the fence.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm just making sure everybody can hear me. Oh, good. Okay. It's you get the perspective. Great. You get the perspective a little bit differently across the organization. So it's not just a lens of an external or of an entire organization. It's also by a department. It's by an individual person inside the organization. And so the perception could be all over the place. You could come in as a best friend to one person, and the next day you're somebody else's problem child. And I think that's part of the problem that procurement organizations and people in general just typically have is they strive to become the trusted advisor is the ultimate role, right? And the ultimate way to get there is by being in the trenches with people and helping them solve their problems, facilitating commerce in a way that sort of wasn't there before. And what you'll find is, there are, skill set deficits sometimes within the procurement org. I think there's also, an opportunity to transform minds and heads, right? And so I always look at each of those interactions as a way to change their opinion, right? And to help the overarching organizational goals.
I'm going to talk later on, thanks for that, Frank, around, you prompted me around, what the procurement, from the procurement side of the fence, what the expectations are or even requirements or asks of the finance community to make you successful. But let's save that one for later. You just sort of prompted me on that. So, no, that's great. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Let me just move on to number 2. And if you've got any questions, I'm talking to the wider audience here, then please feel free to send the question in. We've got some questions coming through already. I'm actually reading them as we speak. So I'll bring those into play in just a second. So let me just introduce the second question on here. And this is more related to the experience of the panel members we have today. So what I'm asking them is around, what solutions, solutions could mean, tech, it could be processes, it could be people, it could be a combination of everything. What have you actually implemented yourselves in your experience? It doesn't have to be with your current organization. It could be somewhere in the past. John's done 150 of these, so there's a lot to go at here. So what solutions have you adopted in the past to optimize and control spend, particularly the indirect spend, but also direct spend as well? And then I just want to know, that was it a tech solution? Was it people? What was it? And then as you can see, there's a couple of sort of sub-questions which will flow into is around, I'm really keen to understand how successful those solutions were, and what learning did we take away and how have we reapplied that. So on this one, maybe Frank, I'll start with you if that's okay, because I know you've done this, of course, from a procurement perspective. So can you give us some sort of insight, whether it's at DocuSign or your previous roles, around what solutions you brought to bear and how you've done that?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because, I think it taps into a few different areas that are important to consider, right? So in general, before I start thinking about solutions or technology, I tend to think about, okay, how am I gonna evaluate this brand new thing that I'm walking into? And so, from my lens, I'm going through a method, sort of a similar methodology over time of kind of diagnosing people either through a skills assessment or interviews, using other benchmark tools like Gartner, some other various things like that. I'm also diagnosing the environment, what it's like to sort of get things done, what are the different processes, who are the players. I'm typically looking at how those people are interacting with the current stack of tools between source to pay in general, and just assessing whether there's gaps in the environment. Is there a new technology that's required? Are there new processes that are required? Are there new people that maybe we need to bring in to supplement some sort of skill set deficit that we have? And this is repeatable, right? It's something that you just sort of walk into and you sort of ask yourself, what do you do in the first 90 days? Well, that's what I'm doing, right? In the first 90 days, kind of making that evaluation. And then once I kind of figure what that is, then I look at tool sets. And usually the first thing I walk into is more on the spend analysis side. So if I don't have the time to digest all of the invoice, PO data, et cetera, what I'm typically doing is heavily leveraging companies like a Symphony. I've used other companies in the past like Suplari or BIQ Lexington Analytics, Spend HQ. There's a few tools out there, right? But these companies are super helpful in just kind of taking your data and making sense of it, right? Creating a rationalization of suppliers, spend optimization, harmonization sort of techniques, if you will, in the tool itself. And that helps you sort of focus on, okay, what do I go after first? From a prioritization perspective in terms of saving the company money. And then there's a suite of tools, right, that you can sort of get into in between all of that from source to pay, thinking like orchestration tools like, ServiceNow or Zip, or, you can even use Smartsheet, Google, Airtable. There's a ton, right? Procurement technology is huge right now. And there's a lot of point solution applications as well as like full blown suites that can sort of solve a lot of these problems for you. And so, the suites are more, along the lines of like your Scouts or your Oracle, SAP, Workday, that sort of thing. I've worked through a lot of these solutions, so I have a lot of experience kind of running through a lot of them. What I would say is every organization is different, and the needs are always a little bit different with each organization. But typically that first point of entry is that spend analysis to sort of dictate what we look at. To answer that last point on that slide, just about lessons learned, one thing about technology for me is I don't want to implement technology without understanding what I want to fix or why. And so having that sort of clear North Star of what I'm trying to go after is really important. I also like to focus on the user's journey, right? So not just myself as an admin user of a lot of these applications, but how is this going to help somebody else or make their life easier? Because from an adoption perspective, having it be easy for your end users is everything along the journey, right? That's why they start trusting you and start, liking the process a little bit better, because you're making it easier for them. And lastly, just to cap it off there is the collaboration component of it all. Just ensuring that you bring not design in a vacuum, but instead sort of bringing everybody along in the journey. And that means bringing your finance counterparts and your accounting counterparts and your business partners and anybody that needs to be involved with the process to ensure that you're also getting that alignment on the process itself. I'll stop there.
That's fantastic. No, it's fantastic. There's a huge amount to go up there. I like the piece on the lessons learned around the adoption is key. I love that. The collaboration, again, we kind of hit it on the first question, particularly with finance. So lucky we've got finance people on the call today, I guess. And then the other thing you said is sort of start with the data. So what's the as is? Where's the money going? Who are my suppliers? Where do I start? So that diagram that we showed earlier, I might go back to it actually. The sort of Pareto type thing is that we can then bracket or zone the spend to say, well, what is my strategic spend and what's going on there? What's the risk in that spend? All the way down to this, buying office supplies or buying the office printer or copier, whatever it is. What's going on there? Is there a contract in place, or is it just done by someone else? Can I just bring in, because I know the other guys have got really great stuff on here. I mean, John, do you want to go next in terms of, I know you've been tackling procurement and enhancing stuff at your organization. Do you want to give a flavor of what you've done to actually enhance performance there?
Sure, Stefan. I think we are on as most organizations, on a journey. So some things we've implemented, some things we're in process of implementing, and some things are just a gleam in maybe my manager of supply chain in my eyes. But I think the one thing we did certainly right away was look at our talent and realize that we had to leverage, which is, I think, what you were speaking to with Symphony as well, but leverage the talent that we have internal with external. And the way we did that in our case was join a large GPO. That first thing we did was dump all our purchasing data to them so that they could do an analysis of what we were spending our money on and align that with the contracts we had in place versus the contracts that the GPO could bring to us because of their purchasing power, and seeing if we moved, say, a certain commodity over, where we could save money. So that we did right away and achieved significant savings. And also, we have a lot of, in healthcare, at least healthcare in Canada and Ontario, have a lot of legislative requirements in terms of they're called broader public sector purchasing guidelines, because the government wants to make sure, since we're spending taxpayers' money, that we spend it as well as we can. And so that joining that group allowed us to, access contracts and not have to run RFPs ourselves, which are very resource intensive. we could jump on contracts that have already been negotiated, and certainly that's a real win for us internally to control the indirect spend. We're looking at deploying purchasing cards, which will allow better control over that small spend in some of the areas, as well as our ERP. We had e-procurement or e-requisitioning, which we'd had for years. This is going to paid the license fees to have this software, but never implemented it because we just, I guess people just didn't have the time or resources. So we're implementing that, which will allow a paperless, requisitioning process by the users, and also control the spend by, assigning dollar limits on what they can spend their money on. So those are a few things, Stefan, that we're implementing or in the course of. But it's a big culture change, as you know. Change is people always say they like to embrace change, but it's never, once you start to change them, then the resistance comes up.
And thank you for that. And so I guess you were part lucky in that you had a e-requisitioning platform that was kind of dormant. It was paid for. I mean, this is normally one of the barriers to entry, that you've got to buy this stuff. So you're basically rolling out something that was prepaid.
Yes.
Coming back around to Paul, because you've done this so many times, from the sort of private equity angle, do you have a solution, whether it's a rinse, repeat type solution, or platform solution, plug and play, whatever, that you go into a new entity and get things going? Do you have any particular solution in its broader sense, Paul, that you plug in?
Yeah, I mean, because I've been part of so many integrating companies, and in addition to private equity backed, I've worked for a number of global multi-billion-dollar publicly held companies that we've had some of the greatest tools, whether they're legacy out of your ERP system or a bolt-on system like yours. I've had the luxury of having everything from an Excel spreadsheet to a pretty sophisticated process. But what I also think is important here is, Frank touched upon, the first 90 days, and I think it's so important as you walk in the company, you kind of jump right in. And my first 30 days cover a whole bunch of different things. One, it's what is the procurement strategy of the organization? And sometimes it takes a lot of people in an organization to, define that, because it's not always crystal clear. I then like to understand what are the top 3 priorities. And it's amazing how many times people don't know what's number 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 5, because, good intentions, you want to get to all your priorities. In the real world, it's hard to get to the top 3, so you have to have a very clear list. And then the third one, which is germane here, it's great to analyze data in order to support the strategy and come up with those priorities. And I always found, especially when I walked into a larger organization, their robust systems make it a lot easier, have a lot more data to analyze, to make better decisions, set priorities. And so one of the things here that when you look at implementing solutions is, does that software solution that you have really help you and enable you to create strategies, manage the business, and then really track performance of what you're doing? That's the most important thing, setting proper KPIs. So going forward, if you're going to save 5% to 15%, you can measure that every day and see if you're tracking to that.
Yeah, exactly. There's a great point there, particularly around the procurement strategy and what are the top 3 priorities. And I like the 90-day plan or 100-day plan, whatever it may be. You both said that, Frank, as well. I think that's a great point. I'm going to just bring in a question, actually. We've got a number of questions flowing through. So just to the audience, if you've got questions on here, then please tap them in. We've got a number of them coming through. One of the questions, and I'm going to go back to, I'm going to share a slide from earlier, which sort of shows the sort of spend breakdown, if I can find it. Here we go. Okay, so let me just see if I can bring this slide up. So this is like a picture of spend across an organization. It's obviously illustrative. It will vary to a certain degree by industry. But the question is, and this is from Donald here at Paladine, you talk about here, particularly with sort of mid-market companies, so we're not talking about the top again, not the top sort of Fortune 100 or 200 organizations that have probably got maybe armies of procurement people. So that's rare when you come into the next sort of companies. When you talk about sort of specialist services, like he's talking about here, transportation as a very good example. Okay, where you need to move products around, you're doing lanes, you're doing maybe ocean freight as well as road, and then other areas like IT and telecom. So sort of specialist niche areas. Most mid-market companies don't have the breadth of category expertise in those areas. So what would you do? And unless you've got an army of procurement people, and I don't think it's an army. What do you guys do in terms of getting specialist expertise, if at all, in areas like transportation and IT? Any particular views in terms of what you've done in the past to address those areas? I don't know if anyone wants to go first. I don't know, Frank, you must have done some of this.
Yeah, I mean, resourcing is a struggle, right? Like just in general. So for myself, if I don't have the talent internally, typically I'm either coming up with a creative way of addressing it somehow with, benchmark services of some kind that I can sort of glean my hands on, maybe referencing peers. But a lot of times what ends up happening is you have to use external organizations to sort of gain that expertise, right? And, companies like Symphony, there are others out there, do this sort of work day in and day out, and they can certainly sort of bolster your capabilities for items that maybe don't have to be addressed every year. Maybe they can be addressed every 3 years, and you can kind of think about it on a category by category specific basis to just kind of bring that, and then in due time, sort of hire the talent that you need to address it over time. So me, from the procurement lens, like, address the problem and the gap and the skill set, immediately with, sort of outsourced capabilities, I think is sort of the best way usually to address this type of stuff. But that's my lens, right?
Yeah. I don't know whether Paul or John have got any similar experiences where maybe you parachute a specialist in to do something, and then that deal runs for 2 years or something like that. Have you done that before?
I would, Stefan, I would say that, yes, the same experience as Frank. Say we don't do a lot of construction procurement. And so we have a lot of projects coming up, and we just don't have the bandwidth or the expertise, because that's a specialized, just like IT is a specialized skill set. So I'd look to a third party to help us, go to market on those items, because they'll pick up the things that we might miss, because everyone is specialized, and procurement is no different. So the IT procurement is different than a widget procurement or a construction project procurement. So it's a way to mitigate your risk by bringing in expertise. You can do it yourself, and in fact, in our case, what we used to do was rely on, say, the engineering consultants to run the RFPs for us, but there's a cost to that. And so in the interest of saving money, it's better to try to run it ourselves. And sometimes the third parties can do it cheaper than, say, an engineering firm or an architectural firm. So you save money there, and you probably get a better or equivalent product or outcome.
Yeah, and on top of everything you just said, and also Frank as well, in our experience, procurement teams are, if anything, getting smaller. They're actually shrinking. So gone are the days where you can have huge teams and add resource on here. So you need to be agile and nimble. And Frank's right, we do these services. I know here Donald does as well. So there's other experts out there in the field that can do this. You don't need to do everything yourself. Those sort of days are on the wane. And just a link to that, there was another question actually from John at First Ontario Credit Union. So I guess just down the road from you, the other John. And this was on how you control IT spend in the budget process, and how do you sort of tackle that from a procurement perspective. What he's saying here is that we found that double-digit year-on-year cost increases, and it's often difficult to understand whether or not the IT budget requests are valid. So no one knows what the real price is. So I guess it's an extension of the previous question in IT. Is there someone there who's really understanding the market for IT? You obviously understand IT, but what's the commercial aspect of that? Any views on the IT one? It's kind of an extension from the previous question.
IT spend's interesting, right? Because part of it is headcount. It depends what kind of licensing model you have with each of the commodities that you're buying, right? And so if you are growing headcount wildly, your IT expenses are going to grow. Your sales ops software is going to grow heavy, right? Like it depends where you're sort of growing in the organization. Like those software spends are going to grow tremendously. You're storing a lot of data, you use a lot of cloud products. That stuff's going to grow exponentially. There is a way to forecast it. You do have to get ahead of the process. You do have to dive into things like total cost modeling. And then you have to do some proper forecasting. If it's coming as a surprise, there's probably more digging that has to be done because it shouldn't be, right? A lot of this stuff is very predictable, especially when it comes to IT spend. That's my lens, what I've seen.
Great, thank you for that. And hopefully this is John from First Ontario. Hopefully that gives you some sort of flavour on this. I'm just going to move us along, if that's okay. I'm going to go on to the next slide. I do have a question hangover myself from this around implementation timelines, but let me just move on to the next question, on to number 3. So this is about, okay, what's stopping us? Okay, so you spoke very eloquently about the first 90 days, about getting spend data being critical, it sets foundation. Also about, what are the top 3 priorities for procurement? Okay, so we've got some very good ideas that you've actually run successfully. So for the wider audience here, is if we've got this picture of, as it says, what a high-performing procurement team looks like, why isn't procurement loved by everyone? Why isn't it, flying high and delivering savings, delivering process efficiencies? It's going to be wall-to-wall automation. I showed that slide earlier. We know that only elements of procurement, it's a laggard. There's no other way of saying it. Procurement's a laggard overall. It's way behind many other internal operational areas like finance and HR, etc. So what's stopping it? Is it the sky-high cost for tech? Is it capability? What is it? The finance guys just saying no to the procurement guys? You can't have this. What is this? So on this one here, maybe I start off with a bona fide finance guy first. So maybe John, would you maybe kick us off here? So what are the barriers to doing good procurement?
Yeah, it's us evil finance guys that toward procurement being everything it could be. But in all seriousness, I mean, I think Stefan, I think it's the tone at the top is where it starts. So I think if you don't have a recognition at the top of the organization about how important procurement is, and I think this webinar has certainly made that clear. I think just how key a function it is. If you don't have the tone at the top and the support, it's hard to get anything done. Combine that with the talent, and in terms of the credentials of your purchasing and supply chain staff. If they don't have the, as I've said before, you kind of don't know what you don't know. If they haven't had the education or been exposed, we don't all have the luxury of Paul that's done 150 companies, that, if you don't have that breadth of experience, it's hard to know where to look. So you have to have support from the top. You have to have the skill set within your function to be able to identify. And, with those two, you get the culture right in terms of a readiness for change. I think of, personalizing it. This organization, I think the purchasing function hadn't changed in probably 25 years. And so you'd say, well, gee, and just proves your point about that it lags behind. And why is that? And I think it's just because they're reviewed as order takers and almost like a barrier to getting business done. And you have to turn that around to say, no, purchasing and procurement, we want to make the organization look good and make you look good as a manager or a leader by showing the value we've added to the operation. So I think I'll stop and let everyone else weigh in because I'm sure there's lots of views on this.
So I'm sure there are. I know there are. So maybe Paul, if we pivot to you, and maybe let Frank go last on here as a procurement person. Anything to add, Paul, to what John was talking about just there?
Yeah, it's amazing if when you do a return on investment, whether it's software or anything else, if you can build a compelling case for management and has a great return on investment, it's pretty hard for people to say no. I think, as I mentioned before, procurement, in my experience, has never been at the top of the priority list. I can tell you here at BlueCrest, it's very, very important, both indirect and direct procurement, mission critical. It's amazing what happens when you bring in someone, whether it's sales, finance, that has a lot of energy, wants to drive technology, wants to show return on investment. It's amazing what will happen. So I think part of the barriers are, the more obvious ones. It's not just the cost of the software. People put in SAP. I put in SAP at a company that cost us $30 million. So that's a big barrier to overhang, but we did a return on investment. Why was it important to do that? What was the future of the company? And although it took us a lot, it was hard to forecast expenses and took us a lot more money to implement it. The return on investment was 2 years on a system like that. That cost us $30 million. So I just think, Frank's probably in the best case to walk us through how he walks in the door and breaks down those barriers.
Frank, the baton is handed over to you.
It's funny because ROI is it's not just a technology thing. It's also sort of a people thing. And sometimes we have to take really hard decisions on whether something's working or it's not. Maybe something's a little too old school, to John's point, right? And maybe things need to get shaken up. I think in a lot of instances, when procurement is looked at as I had a colleague call it the tip of the spear once, right? If it is looked at in that way, and you're given the appropriate tools and you pay the appropriate market rates for like good talent, then you will see higher returns faster, right? Because those people will yield those sorts of returns in a much more methodical, much more complex manner, and they'll be able to infiltrate in a much stronger way. So sometimes, I look at this, from a procurement lens too. You think, cheapest cost is always the way to go. It's not, right? Sometimes when you actually run the numbers, it pays to pay a little bit more to figure that out. And so, not that I'm sitting here advocating to pay procurement people, the high engineering salaries here, but I think there's components to this, right? And as you look through common trends that you have today with the Great Resignation and how you treat people and the culture and things that you foster, to John's point, it starts from the top, right? And you have to everybody works together to cohesively raise EPS, to cohesively raise net profit margins, right? And it's a group effort. Anyways, I'll leave it at that.
Exactly, yeah. And the reason I just brought this slide back up again, because we find a lot, the first hurdle, as it were, that organizations fall over on or can't get over the wall is basically about the cost of the applications. Now, of course, they can build business cases, but then some of that, and the word here, it says hazy ROI, they don't get, if it's not really concrete. And it's difficult to make it concrete, actually, because you're saying, well, actually, I think I can get 7%, based on my previous experience, but, that's a different organization. So that, get flushed away. Because it's a lot of money and it's up front, and the ROI is, 24 months out, which is why, we particularly have dismantled that pricing model and actually linked it to the actual spend and the savings. But I just wanted to come back to that. I'm going to move us on to to question 4, which is the last question here, and I'm just got an eye on the clock as well. I think some of this we've actually picked up earlier. So this is around, this is a much more sort of practical, pragmatic question at the end, particularly for some of our audience members here. It's about, how do we get started? Where do I start? There's so much to do here. How do I prioritize? And I think through the course of this dialogue, we've actually got some of these on the out there. We talked about the first 90 days, about spend analysis being a critical component. To kick off with that, which I would definitely agree with, getting buy-in and adoption. So we've listed a number of things here as well. Is it around evaluating the current state? Is it all about the savings? Nothing else counts. So on this one here, I actually want to go around all of us here to get your views in terms of, okay, maybe what does that 90 or 100-day plan look like? What components from here need to come in, and in what sequence? Recognizing that it may vary by company, we get that. But maybe if I start with Paul, because you've done this 150 times and counting, I think it's only fair that we start with you. You must have some sort of, as I said earlier, rinse repeat type model. But what are your priorities when you go into a new organization, Paul?
Yeah, I think I outlined them, Stefan, already to the group here. I think it's like anything else. Here at BlueCrest, when I walked in the door, we went through the same exercise and we said, okay, we had these 3 top priorities, and we did our analysis and we focused on them as an organization, both from a people, process, and technology standpoint. And then we started working our way down. And by the time we got to the 3rd group, which is about a year ago, procurement jumped to the top of the list of great opportunities where we could look at, margin improvement. We can look at cost containment. We can look at vendor management, vendor consolidation, policies and procedures. I think we go through the same process in every area, starting company-wide and all the way down, and then doing it both in territorial areas. So, 70% of our revenue comes out of North America, primarily the U.S., and the rest is international. And so sometimes we take it in bits and pieces. But our biggest procurement challenge is not in the U.S. It really is internationally, because we're doing it in 13 different countries. So, we don't talk a lot about, those dynamics. But my biggest challenges in the last year have really been orchestrating that globally, not just here in the U.S., especially from an indirect standpoint. And what we did there was, it was just a new level of focus. What were some of the issues? How do we leverage technology to cure those things? And here at BlueCrest, all of our international indirect spend is managed through technology investment.
Wow. Okay. I understand that. And quickly go to John and then to Frank. I'm just conscious of the time here. We're almost on the hour. John, anything to add to that? I know you covered some of this already. Any other key takeaways about getting started?
Yeah, Stefan, I think I don't think I could say it any better than Paul. So just briefly, I think it's coming in, doing a current state analysis, seeing, where things are in terms of the talent, in terms of where the money's being spent, and then assessing where the gaps are, and what you need to get there, whether it's talent, process improvement, technology change. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. And Frank, there's probably limited areas to cover. I think our finance friends have covered a lot of this. But are there any other last comments to make on top of what they've already said?
No, I think that's it, right? There's the low-hanging fruit stuff, prioritization of spend opportunities, going after quick win things, but there's also, sort of the infrastructure components of things, like make sure nothing's broken. Sometimes that creates a little, more noise for you in the process. So it might be the downstream things that you might have to tackle first and then sort of go solve the upstream stuff. I've seen that as well, but it's different at every organization, but I think this methodology sort of works, right, in general. So evaluate it, see what's there, fix whatever, gaps you have from a people, process, technology perspective.
Thank you. That's fantastic. So I'm going to wrap us up here. There were some polling questions, which I think we're going to send out to the audience afterwards. I'd rather do it separately. So we're going to digest this and send this out to the audience as well. So any other questions come back. But I would like to offer my sincere thanks to our panel today, to Paul, to John, to Frank. Okay, that was a great, very dynamic conversation, particularly across finance and procurement, which I always love. So thank you from us and the wider audience here for your participation. As I say, Symphony are operating in space, particularly for those organizations that are struggling to actually automate and get to that spend, particularly in indirects, as we said. So we'd love to talk to audience members who are maybe, experiencing some of these trials and tribulations. Okay, we're a global business, as I mentioned, so it's North America, Europe, Middle East, down to Australia. So no matter where you are, Paul was talking about the 13 countries here, then we'd love to speak with you. So we hope you found that interesting. We're going to send out a debrief of this to everyone and our contact details. So again, to our panel, thank you. And thank you to Marcus Evans for supporting the event. Caroline, I hand back over to you.
Thanks, Stefan. A kind reminder to look out for an email within the next 2 hours with links to download today's material. We would also like your feedback, so if you could take a minute to answer our very brief survey that will pop up on your screen at the end of the session, that would be very much appreciated. On behalf of Symphony and Marcus Evans online events, we'd like to thank you all for joining us, and we do hope that you will be listening in at our next webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day and do stay safe. Goodbye.